Part 1 Commander Jake Morrison stood at the large window of the space station, looking down at Earth. The planet looked peaceful from up here, with its blue oceans and white clouds. He had spent the last 15 years working with alien species, helping them, teaching them, building things together. But something had changed in the last few years. Something important. Dr. Lisa Grant walked up beside him. She held a tablet in her hands and her face showed worry. Lisa had been the chief medical officer on this station for 8 years. She had saved countless alien lives, working day and night to cure diseases that affected species from across the galaxy. Another request came in today. Lisa said quietly, "The human colony on Bright Star wants to come home. They're packing up everything." Jake nodded slowly. He had expected this. In the past 6 months, 47 human colonies had requested permission to return to Earth. The number kept growing every week. Human traders were closing their businesses. Human engineers were leaving their jobs at construction sites across the galaxy. Human doctors were saying goodbye to their alien patients. It had not always been like this. 300 years ago, when humanity first traveled beyond their own solar system, the aliens had welcomed them. The Galactic Council had celebrated Earth joining the community of spacefaring civilizations. Humans were creative and hardworking. They solved problems in new ways. They built things that lasted. They made friends easily with other species. Humans had spread across hundreds of worlds. They started businesses. They opened hospitals. They taught in schools. They served as peacekeepers when conflicts arose between alien species. Everywhere humans went, things got better. Trade routes became more efficient. Factories produced more goods. Farms grew more food. The galaxy prospered and humans were proud to be part of it. But over time, the alien species started to take humans for granted. They stopped seeing humans as partners and started seeing them as workers. Useful workers, yes, but nothing more than that. When humans suggested new ideas in council meetings, the aliens would nod politely and then ignore them. When humans asked for fair treatment, the aliens would promise to think about it and then do nothing. 2 years ago, everything came to a head. The Galactic Council passed a new law called the Resource Allocation Act. This law created heavy taxes on businesses run by humans. At the same time, it gave tax breaks to businesses run by the founding alien species. Human representatives in the council had voted against this law. They had given speeches explaining why it was unfair. But the alien councilors had voted for it anyway. Jake remembered watching that vote. He had been on Earth visiting his family. The broadcast showed Ambassador Kyle Peterson standing at his podium in the council chamber. Kyle had served as Earth's chief ambassador for 20 years. He was a patient man, always willing to negotiate and find common ground. But that day something in him had broken. "You have shown us exactly where we stand in your eyes," Kyle had said, his voice calm but filled with disappointment. "We are not your partners. We are not your equals. We are tools you use when convenient. Well, tools can be put away. Don't be surprised when we choose to leave your workshop." Kyle had walked out of the council chamber that day. Within a week, he had resigned and returned to Earth. The alien counselors had laughed about it. They thought he was just upset and would calm down eventually. They thought humans would complain for a while and then accept the new law, just like they had accepted so many other unfair decisions in the past. They were wrong. President Helen Carter had called a meeting with her advisors 1 month after the vote. Jake had been there, along with other military commanders and civilian leaders. Helen was a strong leader who had always believed in cooperation between species, but even she had reached her limit. "We've tried everything," Helen had said. "We've negotiated. We've compromised. We've been patient. And in return, we've been treated like servants. Our people deserve better than this." She had proposed something radical. Instead of fighting the new law, instead of arguing more in the council, humanity would simply leave. Every human in the galaxy would be given the choice to return home. The government would help them pack up their lives and bring them back to Earth or to colonies in the Sol system. No threats, no ultimatums, just a quiet departure. The proposal had passed unanimously. President Helen had signed Executive Order 2891 in a small ceremony, with only a few witnesses present. The order was simple and clear. Any human citizen who wanted to return to Earth or the Sol system would receive full government support. Transport ships would be provided. Moving costs would be covered. Jobs would be waiting at home. The news had spread quickly through human communities across the galaxy. At first, some humans thought it was just a political gesture, a way to pressure the Galactic Council into changing the law. But as the weeks passed and government transport ships began arriving at human colonies, people realized this was real. The aliens had not believed it at first. They kept expecting humans to back down, to negotiate, to ask for something. But humans were done negotiating. They were done asking. They were just done. Jake turned away from the window. Down below, he could see transport ships coming and going from Earth. Each one carried hundreds of humans returning home. Each one took away doctors, engineers, teachers, farmers, artists, and peacekeepers. The galaxy was losing them all, and it did not even realize yet what that would mean. How long until we leave? Lisa asked. 2 more weeks, Jake replied. We finish shutting down the medical wing, transfer the last patients to alien care, and then we're gone. Lisa looked sad. I trained some of those alien doctors myself. They're good people. It feels wrong to leave them like this. Jake understood how she felt. Most aliens were not bad people. They had just become comfortable with the way things were. They had stopped noticing how much humans did for them. They had stopped appreciating the partnership. Maybe this will teach them, Jake said. Maybe when we're gone, they'll realize what they had. Maybe next time they'll treat their partners with respect. And if they don't learn? Lisa asked. Jake smiled, but it was not a happy smile. Then they'll learn to live without us? Either way, it's not our problem anymore. Outside the window, another transport ship rose from Earth, heading toward a distant colony to bring more humans home. The exodus had begun, and nothing would stop it now. Part 2 Ambassador Zekthar of the Vryn Concordat was angry. His species had been part of the Galactic Council for over 2,000 years. They were used to getting what they wanted. And right now he wanted to speak with a human ambassador who would listen to reason. He walked through the human embassy on Crossroads Prime, a massive space station that served as neutral ground for all species. The embassy was usually full of activity. Diplomats rushing between meetings, clerks managing paperwork, security guards watching the doors. But today the halls were almost empty. Zekthar found only one human in the main office. A young man named Chris Bailey was carefully packing artwork into protective containers. Chris looked up when the ambassador entered, but he did not stop working. Where is Ambassador Peterson? Zekthar demanded. His translator device turned his clicking sounds into English words. He retired, sir, Chris said politely. He wrapped a painting of the Grand Canyon in soft cloth. He went back to Earth 3 months ago. He's spending time with his grandchildren now. Zekthar's antenna twitched with frustration. This is ridiculous. The council is ready to negotiate. We can discuss the tax law. We can make adjustments. Chris stopped packing and looked at the alien ambassador. His expression was calm, almost sad. Negotiate what exactly? The taxes you already collected from us. The contracts you already broke. The promises you already ignored. He turned back to his work. We're done negotiating, Ambassador. We're just done. You can't just leave, Zekthar said, but his voice had less certainty now. You have responsibilities, obligations. We fulfilled our obligations, Chris replied. We've trained replacements everywhere we could. We've written instruction manuals for all our systems. We've transferred control of facilities properly. What we won't do is stay where we're not valued. Zekthar wanted to argue more, but he could see it was pointless. This young human had made up his mind, just like all the others. The ambassador left the embassy feeling something he rarely felt. Fear. The same scene was playing out across the entire galaxy. On every human-run facility, on every colony where humans lived, on every station where humans worked, the exodus continued. Dr. Marcus Webb had spent 20 years running the Kepler Medical Research Station. The facility was famous across the galaxy. Marcus and his team had developed cures for 17 different alien diseases. They had trained doctors from dozens of species. The station's research had saved millions of lives. Now Marcus was shutting it all down. He stood in the main laboratory watching his team pack up equipment. A trail doctor named Koresh stood beside him looking worried. Please reconsider, Koresh said. We still have so much work to do. The Vryn plague in the outer colonies. The Kravik genetic disorder. There are projects that will take years to complete. Marcus liked Koresh. They had worked together for 8 years. Koresh was smart and dedicated, but that did not change the situation. I offered to stay and finish the training program, Marcus said. I offered to spend 6 extra months making sure everyone knew how to run the systems. The council said it wasn't necessary. They said any competent doctor could figure it out. Koresh looked down at his feet. He had been in that meeting. He had heard the council representatives dismiss Marcus's concerns. They were wrong, Koresh said quietly. Yes, they were, Marcus agreed. But I'm tired of being ignored. I'm tired of working my hardest just to be told my concerns don't matter, so I'm going home. 3 weeks later, the Kepler Medical Research Station went dark. The alien doctors tried to continue the work, but they quickly realized how much they did not know. Systems that had seemed simple when Marcus ran them turned out to be incredibly complex. Research projects that had been moving forward smoothly ground to a halt. Within 2 months, the station was barely functional. On the industrial side of the galaxy, similar problems were emerging. The Proxima shipyards had been the largest spacecraft construction facility in the Outer Rim. It could build everything from small personal ships to massive cargo vessels. The yards employed thousands of workers from many species, but the facility had been designed and managed by humans. Engineer Nicole Hayes had been the chief operations officer for 12 years. She knew every system, every process, every shortcut that kept production running smoothly. When she announced her departure, the Kravik administrator who was taking over had seemed confident. "We have all your manuals," the administrator had said. "We have your staff training materials. We'll be fine." Nicole had tried to explain that running the shipyards was not just about following manuals. It required constant adaptation. Equipment broke down in unexpected ways. Supply chains had disruptions. Workers needed motivation and clear direction. But the administrator had waved away her concerns. On her last day, Nicole handed over the access codes and walked away. Within a month, production at the shipyards had dropped by 60%. Within 3 months, the facility had stopped building new ships entirely. The Kravik workers stood around staring at broken machines they did not know how to fix. The agricultural colonies faced similar disasters. Haven's Rest had been a marginal planet before humans arrived. The soil was poor. The weather was unpredictable. Local plants were barely edible. But human farmers had transformed it into the breadbasket of 3 sectors. Dan Cooper had been one of those farmers. He had spent 15 years developing crop varieties that could grow in Haven's Rest soil. He had designed irrigation systems that worked with the planet's strange weather patterns. He had taught alien farmers his techniques, sharing everything he knew. But when Dan announced he was leaving, his alien neighbors had panicked. Kasha, a Trell farmer who lived on the next plot of land, had come to Dan's house to beg him to stay. "The harvest will fail without you," Kasha said. "We don't fully understand your systems. The crops you developed, the timing of planting, the soil treatments. We need more time to learn." Dan felt sorry for Keisha. They had been friends for years. Their children played together. But friendship was not enough anymore. "I offered to stay for 1 more growing season," Dan said. "I offered to do detailed training. The colonial administrator said you didn't need it. He said farming is farming and any species can do it." Keisha's face showed shame. He was a fool. "We all were. We took you for granted." "Yes, you did," Dan said, not unkindly. "And now you'll learn to manage on your own. Maybe you'll succeed, maybe you'll fail, but either way, it's not my responsibility anymore." Dan and his family left Haven's Rest 2 weeks later. The next harvest failed completely. The harvest after that was barely enough to feed the local population. Within a year, Haven's Rest went from exporting food to importing it, and there was never enough. All across the galaxy, the pattern repeated. Human traders closed their routes and supply chains collapsed. Human peacekeepers resigned and old conflicts flared up again. Human teachers left their schools and alien students struggled without them. Human artists stopped performing and cultural centers went dark. The Galactic Council held emergency meetings every week. The counselors argued about what to do. Some wanted to force humans to stay, to arrest them for breaking contracts. But there were no broken contracts. Humans had fulfilled every legal obligation. Some counselors wanted to negotiate, to offer better terms, but humans were not answering their calls. Counselor. Mira of the Trell was one of the few who had voted against the Resource Allocation Act. She tried to warn her fellow counselors about what was coming. "We built our civilization on human labor," she said during one meeting. "We used their creativity, their innovation, their willingness to help others. and we gave them nothing but disrespect in return. Now they're leaving and we're surprised? They'll come back, Counselor Thex of the Vryn insisted. Where else can they go? They need the galaxy as much as we need them. Mira shook her head. No, they don't. They have Earth. They have their colonies in the Sol system. They have each other. What do we have? Broken facilities we can't repair. Diseases we can't cure. Conflicts we can't resolve. We need them desperately. They don't need us at all. The chamber went silent as the truth sank in. Part 3 6 months after the human exodus began, the galaxy started falling apart. The problems that had seemed manageable at first grew worse every day. Systems that had worked perfectly for decades suddenly stopped functioning. The aliens finally began to understand what they had lost. The Vaxxon trade network was the first major system to collapse. For over a century, this network had connected thousands of worlds, moving goods efficiently across the galaxy. Merchants used it to ship everything from food to technology. The network was so reliable that most aliens never thought about how it worked. But humans had built that reliability. Human logistics coordinators had designed the routes. They had negotiated with local governments. They had solved problems before most people even knew problems existed. When the humans left, the system kept running for a while on momentum. Then it began to break down. Ships arrived at ports that were not expecting them. Cargo sat in warehouses with no one to claim it. Route schedules conflicted with each other. Merchants found themselves stuck in the wrong systems with goods they could not sell. Within 3 months, the Vaxxon trade network was barely functional. Within 6 months, it had collapsed completely. Alien merchants who had once traveled freely across the galaxy now found themselves stranded. Some lost their entire fortunes, others just gave up and went home, hoping to rebuild their lives in local markets. On Forge Prime, the situation was even worse. This industrial world had been the manufacturing heart of 3 sectors. The factories there produced everything from basic tools to advanced computer systems. Thousands of workers from many species labored in those factories, but the facilities themselves had been designed and maintained by human engineers. Chief Engineer Paul Jensen had tried to prepare the alien workers before he left. He had held training sessions every day for 3 months. He had written detailed manuals explaining every system. He had created video tutorials that walked workers through common problems, but the Kravik overseers had barely paid attention. "We've been watching you work for years," one overseer had said. "We know what to do," Paul had shaken his head. Watching someone work and understanding how to do the work yourself are very different things. These systems are complex. They need constant adjustment. The overseer had waved him away. "You humans always overcomplicate things. Manufacturing is simple. You put materials in one end, finished products come out the other end." Now, 3 months after Paul had left, that same overseer stood in a silent factory, staring at control panels covered with error messages. The machines had stopped working one by one. Some broke down from lack of maintenance. Others stopped because no one knew how to adjust them when conditions changed. The workers tried to fix things, but they did not understand the underlying systems. Production on Forge Prime dropped to almost nothing. Worlds that depended on goods from Forge Prime suddenly had nothing to buy. Local shortages turned into regional crises. The Galactic Council met again, but now the meetings had a desperate tone. Representatives from dozens of worlds demanded action. Their economies were failing. Their people were suffering. They needed the Council to fix things, but the Council had no idea how to fix anything. They had always depended on humans to solve these problems. Now the humans were gone and the counselors were helpless. Counselor Thex stood at his podium, still trying to sound confident. "We must demand that humanity returns. They have moral obligations to help us. They cannot simply abandon the galaxy." Counselor Mira stood up slowly. She looked tired. The past few months had aged her. "Demand? With what leverage? We have nothing they want. We never did." She activated holographic displays that showed the disaster spreading across the galaxy. "Look at these numbers. 30% of all hospitals are no longer functional. 45% of communication networks are failing. 60% of food production is in jeopardy. And these numbers get worse every day." She turned to face her fellow counselors directly. "We did this to ourselves. We treated humans like tools instead of partners. We ignored their voices. We dismissed their concerns. We passed laws that exploited them. And when they finally left, we were surprised. So what do? Another counselor asked, voice small. Mira sat down heavily. We learned to survive on our own, and we hope that someday, maybe generations from now, we'll have learned enough that humans might consider returning. But that's not going to happen in our lifetimes. On Earth, President Helen Carter received messages from alien governments every single day. Her press secretary, Amy Richardson, brought her the latest batch. The Kravik are offering a formal apology and complete tax exemption, Amy said, reading from her tablet. They're also offering to pay reparations for past unfair treatment. Helen barely looked up from her own work. Too late. What else? The Trell are offering us seats on their planetary councils. Full voting rights. They say they want human input on all major decisions. Also too late, Helen said. Next, Amy hesitated. The Vryn are offering to make you Empress of their Concordat. Helen laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Empress? They still don't understand. We don't want to rule them. We never wanted power over them. We just wanted to be treated as equals. She stood and walked to her window, looking out over Geneva. The city was fuller than it had been in decades. Humans from across the galaxy had returned home, bringing their skills and knowledge with them. Earth was thriving. Send them all the same response, and Helen said. Thank them for their offers. Tell them humanity appreciates their interest. But we're done with galactic politics. We're focusing on our own people now. Amy made notes on her tablet. Some of them are getting desperate. There are reports of riots on several worlds, food shortages, medical crises. Some governments are collapsing. Helen felt a pang of sympathy, but she pushed it away. That's unfortunate. But it's not our responsibility to fix their governments. We tried to be good partners. They chose to treat us as servants. Now they're learning what happens when the servants leave. Do you think we'll ever go back? Amy asked quietly. Helen was quiet for a long moment. Maybe, someday, if they change. If they learn. If they're willing to treat us as true equals. She turned from the window. But that's a question for our grandchildren, not for us. Meanwhile, the disaster continued spreading across the galaxy. The Vryn Concordat was breaking apart. Old rivalries that had been settled decades ago were flaring up again without human peacekeepers to mediate. Several colony worlds declared independence. Others formed new alliances. Some regions descended into violence. The Trell-free worlds faced catastrophic famine. Their agricultural systems were failing without human expertise. They tried to buy food from other systems, but the collapsed trade networks made that nearly impossible. Millions of Trell faced starvation. The Kravik Industrial Union watched their economy implode. Without functioning factories, they had nothing to trade. Without trade, they could not get the food and medicine their people needed. The mighty Kravik, who had once been so proud of their industrial power, were reduced to begging for help. And through it all, Earth remained silent. The defensive satellites around the Sol system turned away any alien ships that approached. The few messages that got through were answered with polite refusals. Humanity had withdrawn completely, leaving the galaxy to face the consequences of its own choices. Some alien species tried to adapt. They worked hard to learn the skills humans had taught them. They struggled to maintain the systems humans had built. A few managed to succeed, at least partially. But most failed. The galaxy had become too dependent on human innovation and human problem-solving. When those were taken away, the whole structure collapsed like a building with its foundation removed. In her small apartment in New York, Lisa Grant tried to ignore the news from space. She had returned to Earth and opened a medical clinic treating human patients. She tried to focus on the people she could help instead of thinking about the millions of aliens suffering across the galaxy. But some nights, she could not sleep. She would lie awake thinking about the hospitals she had worked in, the alien patients she had saved, the students she had trained. She wondered how they were managing without her. She wondered how many were dying. Part 4. 1 year after humanity began leaving the galaxy, civilization itself was dying. The carefully built systems that had connected thousands of worlds were gone. In their place was chaos. Captain Oliver Grant commanded the last human outpost beyond the Sol system. Meridian Outpost sat on the edge of explored space, a massive station that had once been a hub for exploration and research. Now it was simply the last door out before humans went home for good. Oliver stood on the command deck watching the docking bay below. Hundreds of aliens crowded the entrance, pushing and shoving, all desperate to get inside. They were refugees from failing colonies, survivors from collapsed governments, Sick people seeking doctors who were no longer there. His second officer, Lieutenant Karen Foster, stood beside him. She looked at the crowd with tears forming in her eyes. "Sir, we have to do something. These people are dying." Oliver felt the weight of command pressing down on him. He was not a cruel man. He had spent 20 years working alongside aliens, making friends with many of them. But he had also seen how those same aliens had treated his people, how they had voted for laws that exploited humans, how they had laughed when human representatives walked out of council meetings. "We've given them all the medical supplies we can spare," Oliver said quietly. "We've shared what food we have. We've provided information about systems that might still be functional. What more can we do?" A young Vryn female pushed her way to the front of the crowd. She carried a child who looked sick, its skin an unhealthy gray color. She pressed her face against the transparent barrier separating the crowd from the station interior. "Please," she cried out, her translator making her words understandable. "My daughter is sick. She needs medicine. She needs a doctor. Please help us." Karen turned to Oliver, her face pleading. "Captain, we have doctors on board. We have medicine. We could save that child." Oliver closed his eyes for a moment. This was the hardest part of command, making choices that felt wrong but were necessary. If we help her, what about the others? There are hundreds down there, all with similar problems. Do we help them all? And what about the thousands more at other stations, millions across the galaxy? Where does it end? "But she's a child," Karen whispered. "They're all someone's children," Oliver replied. "Someone's parent, someone's friend. Every single one of them matters. But we can't save them all. And we can't let ourselves be pulled back into the same situation that made us leave." He turned to face Karen directly. "I remember the council meetings where human representatives were mocked for asking for basic respect. I remember trade agreements written specifically to exploit human labor. I remember being called ungrateful when we asked for fair treatment. These people or their governments made choices. Those choices have consequences." Karen looked back at the crowd. The young Vryn mother was still pressed against the barrier, still holding her sick child. "It feels so wrong, sir. We're supposed to be the good ones." "We were the good ones," Oliver said. "For 300 years, we were good partners, good neighbors, good friends. We extended our hands in cooperation and they used us. We gave our best and they took it for granted. Being good doesn't mean letting yourself be exploited forever." He activated the station intercom. His voice echoed across the docking bay, reaching the crowd below. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant every word. "I truly am. But we cannot help you. We tried to be your partners for centuries, and you made us your servants instead. Now you'll have to save yourselves." The crowd below reacted with anger and desperation. Some shouted. Some cried. Some simply collapsed in defeat. Oliver watched them for a moment longer, then turned away. "Lieutenant, begin final evacuation procedures. I want everyone off this station within 48 hours. The next 2 days were the longest of Oliver's life. The refugee crowd outside grew larger as word spread that humans were leaving. More sick people arrived. More desperate families. More collapsed governments sending representatives to beg for help. Oliver turned them all away. Each refusal felt like a knife in his chest, but he knew this was necessary. If humans stayed, if they helped, they would be pulled right back into the same dynamic that had driven them away. The galaxy would learn nothing. The exploitation would continue. On the final day, as the last humans prepared to board transport ships, a Trell elder managed to get close to the barrier. He was old, his fur gray with age, his movements slow, but his eyes were sharp and clear. "I understand why you're leaving," the elder called out. "I voted against the Resource Allocation Act. I spoke in favor of treating humans as equals, but I was one voice among thousands and I was ignored." Oliver stopped and looked at the elder. There was no anger in the old Trell's face, only sadness and acceptance. "I just want you to know," the elder continued, "that some of us saw you. Some of us valued you, and some of us will teach our children about this moment, about what happens when you take good people for granted." Oliver nodded slowly. "I hope you do, Elder. I hope the next generation learns from this." Then he turned and walked toward the transport ship, and he did not look back. The Meridian outpost was evacuated completely. Its systems were shut down. Its lights went dark. The refugees outside were left floating in space, their small ships clustering around the now dead station. Back on Earth, in a small town in Colorado, Lisa Grant had built a new life. She ran a medical clinic, treating human patients with everyday illnesses. It was simple work compared to the complex alien diseases she had tackled before, but it was honest work and her patients appreciated her. One evening, Jake Morrison came to visit. He had retired from military service and bought a house nearby. They sat on Lisa's porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The sky turned orange and pink and purple, colors that reminded Lisa why Earth was worth coming home to. "Still having nightmares?" Jake asked. He knew her well enough to see the signs. Lisa nodded. "Every night. I dream about the hospital on Kepler Station, about all the patients I left behind, about the diseases we were so close to curing." She looked down at her hands. "I'm a doctor, Jake. I took an oath to do no harm, and by leaving, we're letting millions die." Jake was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Let me ask you something. If we had stayed, would anything have changed?" "We could have saved lives," Lisa said. "Yes," Jake agreed. "But would the aliens have learned to respect us? Would they have stopped exploiting us? Or would our children have inherited the same disrespect, the same unfair treatment forever?" Lisa knew the answer, but it did not make her feel better. Jake continued gently. "Sometimes the most harmful thing you can do is enable someone's bad behavior. If we had stayed and continued to fix all their problems, they would never have learned. They would have kept treating us like tools, disposable and replaceable. The only way to teach them was to leave." "But people are dying," Lisa whispered. "Yes," Jake said simply, "and that's tragic. But they're dying because of choices their governments made. Choices to exploit rather than cooperate. Choices to take rather than give. We can't fix problems that we didn't create, especially when fixing them would only make things worse in the long run." They sat in silence for a while, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Those stars led to other worlds, to alien civilizations struggling to survive. Lisa wondered if any of them were learning the lesson, if any of them truly understood why humans had left. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked finally. Jake looked at her, his expression serious. "I think we did the only thing that had any chance of leading to real change. Whether it works or not, whether they learn or not, that's up to them now. We gave them 300 years of partnership. We showed them what cooperation could achieve. If they choose to let that knowledge die with our absence, that's their choice, not ours." Lisa knew he was right. Intellectually, she understood the necessity of what humanity had done. But emotionally, it still hurt. It would probably always hurt. That was the price of being the one who walked away. You carried the weight of that choice forever. Part 5. 5 years passed. 5 years of silence between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. Earth's defensive satellites turned away any ship that approached the Sol system. The few messages that made it through were answered with polite but firm refusals. Humanity had moved on, building a new future focused inward rather than outward. On Earth, life had improved dramatically. With millions of humans returning home, bringing their skills and knowledge with them, human civilization flourished. New cities were built. Old technologies were improved. Art and culture bloomed. The solar system colonies expanded. Mars became fully self-sufficient. Europa's underwater cities grew. Even Venus was being terraformed, a project that would take centuries but showed humanity's confidence in its future. President Helen Carter, now in her second term, spent most of her time focused on domestic issues. The galaxy beyond Sol system felt distant, almost like a dream from another life, but she never forgot the lessons learned from humanity's time among the stars. One morning, Amy Richardson burst into Helen's office looking worried. "Madam President, we have a situation." A ship entered the system. Helen looked up from her paperwork. "The defense satellites should have turned it away." "They tried," Amy said. "But the pilot is asking for permission to land. She says she's an ambassador and she's not here to negotiate. She just wants to talk." Helen considered this. 5 years without any successful contact, and now an ambassador wanted to talk. She was curious despite herself. "Who is she?" "Her name is Tissara. She's Trell, the ship's barely functional. It looks like it barely made the journey here." Helen thought about it for a long moment. What could this ambassador possibly have to say after 5 years? What could have changed? But curiosity won out. "Let her land. I'll meet with her, but just her, and just for one conversation." 3 days later, Helen sat in a simple meeting room in Geneva. No grand decorations, No formal ceremony, just a table and 2 chairs. When Tessera entered, Helen was struck by how different she looked from the proud Trell diplomats she remembered. This ambassador was thin, her fur patchy, her movements careful like someone who had not eaten well in a long time. Tessera sat down slowly. For a moment she just looked at Helen without speaking. Then she took a deep breath. "I come not as a representative of the Galactic Council," Tessera said, "because the Council no longer exists. It collapsed 2 years ago. The Vryn Concordat has dissolved into civil war. The Kravik Union has fragmented into city-states fighting over resources. My own Trell-free worlds are barely holding together." Helen listened without expression, showing neither satisfaction nor sympathy. "I did not come here to ask for help," Tessera continued. "I did not come to negotiate. I came to apologize." She placed a small data crystal on the table. "This contains testimonials from over 1 million citizens across what remains of galactic civilization. Their words, their apologies, their regrets." Helen picked up the crystal, studying it. It was just a simple storage device, probably containing text and video files, but she understood it represented something more. "Why?" Helen asked simply. "Because you deserve to know," Tessera said. "You deserve to know that we finally understand what we lost. It took us 5 years of suffering, 5 years of watching our civilization fall apart, 5 years of struggling to do things that seemed so easy when you were here. But we learned," Sarah's voice grew quieter, "we learned that partnership requires mutual respect. We learned that taking people for granted destroys relationships. We learned that every person who contributes to society deserves to be valued, not exploited." She looked down at her hands. "These lessons cost us everything. Millions died from diseases you could have cured. Millions more starved when our farms failed. Entire worlds descended into chaos without peacekeepers to help mediate conflicts. The galaxy you left behind is a fraction of what it was. And yet you came alone," Helen observed. "No fleet, no demands, no threats. What would be the point?" Tessera asked. "You left because we failed you. Threatening you would only prove that we still don't understand. Demanding your return would show we still think of you as tools we can command." She shook her head. "I came alone because this is not about politics or negotiations. This is about one person acknowledging to another that we were wrong." Helen stood and walked to the window. Below, she could see Geneva's streets full of humans going about their lives, happy, prosperous, free from the burden of holding together a galaxy that did not appreciate them. "What do you hope to gain from this?" Helen asked, still looking out the window. "Nothing," Tessera said simply. "I hope for nothing. I expect nothing. I came because your species deserved an apology, even if it comes too late to matter." Helen turned back to face the ambassador. For the first time in 5 years, she felt the tight knot of anger in her chest begin to loosen, not because the apology fixed anything, not because it brought back the people who had died, but because it showed that at least some aliens had finally learned. "Tell me," Helen said, sitting back down. "What are you teaching your children now?" Tessera smiled sadly. "We teach them about humanity, about the species who built so much and asked only for respect, about the price of taking people for granted, about how easy it is to destroy something valuable through neglect." She paused. "We teach them that if they ever meet humans again, they should treat them as honored guests, not convenient workers." "That's a good lesson," Helen said. "I hope it takes." Tessera stood to leave. "If centuries from now humanity decides to return to the stars, perhaps the galaxy will be wiser. Perhaps we will have learned to treat our partners with the dignity they deserve. But that's not a decision for today, and I don't ask it of you." She moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "I only ask one thing. Remember us not just for our failures, but also for our learning. Remember that we finally understood, even if understanding came too late." After Tessera left, Helen sat alone in the meeting room for a long time, holding the data crystal. Eventually, Jake Morrison entered. He had been waiting outside during the meeting. "How did it go?" he asked. "Better than expected," Helen admitted. She handed him the crystal. "They're teaching their children about us." "About what happened? About why we left?" Jake examined the crystal. "Think it'll matter? Think they'll really change?" "Maybe," Helen said. "Maybe not. But at least they're trying to learn from their mistakes." She stood and stretched. "Either way, it's not our problem anymore." "Will we ever go back?" Jake asked. echoing a question that had been asked many times over the past 5 years. Helen looked at him thoughtfully. Maybe. Someday. When we're ready, and more importantly, when they're ready. But not in our lifetime. Maybe not in our children's lifetime. She smiled slightly. For now, we focus on us. We build our own civilization, our own way, without needing approval from anyone else. And if they attack? Jake asked. Some aliens might get desperate enough to try taking what they need by force. Helen's smile turned cold. Then they'll learn that humanity offered friendship first, but we're equally capable of defending ourselves. We left in peace. We've stayed away in peace. If anyone is foolish enough to disturb that peace, they'll discover why it was foolish. Jake nodded, satisfied with that answer. He handed back the crystal. What will you do with this? Listen to it, Helen said. All of it. Then archive it, someday, maybe in 100 years or 500 years. When humanity decides what our relationship with the galaxy should be, our descendants can look at this and see what lessons were learned. In the decades that followed, humanity continued to thrive in isolation. The Sol system became a beacon of art, science, and philosophy. Humans explored inward, unlocking the mysteries of consciousness and reality. They built amazing things not to impress others, but because building brought them joy. They created not for profit, but for the sake of creation itself. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the remnants of alien civilization struggled to rebuild. Some worlds succeeded, adapting to their new reality. Others failed and were abandoned. Slowly, painfully, the aliens learned to do for themselves what humans had once done for them, and they taught their children. Every alien child growing up in the aftermath learned about humanity, about the species who had helped them for 300 years and asked only for respect, about what happens when you take valuable things for granted, about the importance of treating partners as equals. On some worlds, humans became almost mythical figures. Stories were told of the wise humans who could fix anything, who could solve any problem. Other worlds were more realistic, teaching that humans were simply people who deserved respect like anyone else. The question remained whether these lessons would last, whether future generations would remember, or whether they would fall back into old patterns, whether the galaxy could ever become a place where humans would feel welcome again. But that was a question for another time, another generation. For now, Earth rested, humanity healed, and the galaxy learned what it meant to lose something irreplaceable. In a small house in Colorado, Lisa Grant sat with her grandchildren, telling them stories about the stars, about worlds she had visited, about aliens she had known, about the hard choice humanity had made to leave. Will we ever go back, Grandma? One child asked.